Ah, Valentine's Day. A day for romance, for cards, and of course, for chocolate. A day for a fancy dinner with your significant other. A day for running through the streets slapping women with sacrificed meat. Wait, what?
Roman priests would sacrifice various different animals. They'd go through the streets of Rome, and they would touch women with these various different sacrificed animals. And if they were touched with the animal, then they would be fertile throughout that coming year.
Needless to say, it's a very, very good thing that this pagan ritual hasn't stuck around in our modern-day celebrations of Valentine's Day. And certainly, it was the influence of the Catholic Church and of Christians who helped make this day about more than just fertility and weird rituals, and more a celebration of love. But all that being said, have you ever really stopped to think about why St. Valentine's Day became associated with love in the first place? Who was St. Valentine anyway?
Right, yeah. It's a bit confusing with the origin of St. Valentine. There's actually possibly three different candidates.
This, by the way, is Father Brendan Lupton. He teaches at Mundelein Seminary in Illinois.
I'm an assistant professor of church history, and my formal area would be patristics, or the fathers of the church.
The name Valentine comes from a Latin root meaning strong or powerful, so in the Roman Empire, it wasn't a unique name. In fact, it was likely pretty popular for hundreds of years. Despite this, Father Brendan says the three most likely candidates for the St. Valentine had something in common. They were all martyrs.
There's one who was a Roman priest and physician who was living during the 3rd century and martyred in 269 under Claudius the Goth. And this was the time of a lot of various different martyrdoms that occurred, especially during the 3rd century.
Another possible candidate for the St. Valentine was the bishop of the Italian city of Tierney, who also seems to have been martyred around the same time. There's actually an entire basilica dedicated to him in Tierney.
And then there's a very obscure St. Valentine the African. And very little is actually known about him, but his name is in some records.
So why the historical obscurity surrounding this guy? His name is so widely known all over the world, and yet we don't seem to know exactly who he was?
We might ask, well, why is it that there's so little information known about the definitive Valentine, especially that he holds such prominence today? And part of the reason is that there was a persecution, it was known as the Great Persecution by the Emperor Diocletian, that started around 303. And during that time, a lot of Christian documents were destroyed. So it's believed that more of the historical information about him possibly was destroyed during that particular persecution. But his sort of cult and memory lived on within the church at large.
Okay, so back to my original question. Which of these three Valentines is the real St. Valentine? There's no definitive historical answer, but the martyr from the year 269 does appear to be the best candidate.
The most prominent of the three Valentines is the physician and priest from Rome.
And in fact, we might even have a relic of him. It's a skull that's thought to be that of St. Valentine. It's venerated in the minor basilica of Santa Maria in Cosmedine, near the Circus Maximus in Rome. The skull was supposedly uncovered during an excavation of Rome in the 1800s.
That skull is now in Saint Santa Maria in Rome, and is always decorated with flowers on his feast day.
So that about covers who St. Valentine likely was, but that doesn't explain how he came to be associated with love.
One of the ideas or theories is that this Claudius the Goth, the emperor at the time, had prohibited marriage amongst the soldiers because he wanted the soldiers to be that much more dedicated to the various different incursions at that time.
And it's believed that the priests may have been performing marriages for the soldiers in secret.
So possibly making some sort of connection between love and St. Valentine.
There's also a possibility that the exchanging of Valentine's cards has something to do with St. Valentine's experience in prison.
Around the 13th century, it was believed that Valentine had befriended his jailer, Asterius, and this jailer happened to have a daughter who was blind. And Valentine actually cured her of her blindness, and even before he was martyred, wrote her a note saying, "You're Valentine." And she was, of course, so grateful. She had recovered her sight. She had received this note. So after he was martyred, she planted a almond tree, which is a sign of love and friendship, near his grave. So sort of a communication of love and respect between these two.
And then finally, it's worth returning to the rather bizarre pagan ritual that we mentioned at the top of the episode. That ancient Roman practice was known as Lupercalia, and supposedly in the 5th century, Pope Gelasius placed a memorial of St. Valentine on the day of that festival instead. There's something else to mention, though. The connection between St. Valentine and romance may, in reality, be far simpler than all that. The poet Chaucer, writing in the 14th century, wrote a poem in which he mentioned St. Valentine.
He said, "For this was on St. Valentine's Day, when every bird cometh there to choose his mate." And what's really interesting is that Chaucer was writing that under the Julian calendar at the time. So our February 14th would be a little bit later in February, so around February 23rd. So that's a time when birds are known to return to England and to start the mating season and choosing a mate. So it could also be just the connection between mating birds and the time of February that made the connection from Chaucer.
Regardless of how St. Valentine became associated with romance, there is one thing we can say for certain. He never gave anyone any chocolates. And that's because chocolate originated in Central and South America and didn't arrive on European shores until over 1,000 years after Valentine's life. The truth about St. Valentine is that, honestly, not much is known about him for sure. In fact, if you go to Mass today on February 14th, you'll probably notice that St. Valentine isn't even the one being honored. Instead, the priest will most likely mention St. Cyril and Methodius. St. Valentine is not officially honored on the Church's liturgical calendar anymore.
And one of the reasons for that is that he was removed from the general calendar in 1969 because of a lack of reliable information about him.
So, the bottom line, there likely was an original St. Valentine. In fact, there may have been several. And in fact, today, there are several more modern saints that have the first name Valentine, likely named after that enigmatic first guy. Regardless of the original St. Valentine's identity, the secular celebrations of love on February 14th have certainly wandered far afield from St. Valentine's original claim to fame, which was martyrdom for the sake of the Church. Most Christians will never face actual martyrdom in this day and age, but Father Brendan said St. Valentine's example of laying down his life is still relevant for all people today who want to love others the way Jesus taught us to.
Even though we don't know exactly who he is or which Valentine he is, of course we can still ask for his intercession and his help, and he's sort of been adopted as the patron of love, if you will. So I'm sure he complies very well with his vocation in heaven.
CNA Newsroom is a production of Catholic News Agency and a service of EWTN News. I'm your host, Jonah McKeown. I produce and edit this show with the help of our executive producer, Kate Oliveira. A very special thanks to Father Brendan for sharing his historical knowledge with us. And I'll leave you with a poem. Cardinals are red, Mary's mantle is blue. You should subscribe to CNA Newsroom. See you next time.